When it comes to Father's Day, some things never change. Dads want steak. In fact, 75% of Americans say there's no better way to celebrate than grilling with the family. That's why I'm giving my dad Omaha Steaks, the original butcher, trusted since 1917. Their steaks are aged for tenderness, hand-cut by master butchers, and full of rich, beefy flavor. I recently tried their filet mignon and all-new smash burgers. Incredible quality and so easy to prepare. Whether it's beef, burgers, chicken, or seafood, every bite is backed by their 100% money-back guarantee. This Father's Day, give Dad the world's best steak experience with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for guaranteed perfect gifts that deliver legendary quality. And for an extra $35 off, use promo code FLAVOR at checkout. That's omahasteaks.com and an extra $35 off with promo code FLAVOR at checkout. See site for details.
Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay because you know whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything. Brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love.
At this point, everyone in the beer industry is fully aware of the fact interest in our favorite beverage seems to be waning a bit, and while we're not entirely sure why this is happening the way that it's happening, one reason many people I know have chosen to either cut back or completely cut out not just beer, but alcohol in general, is for their health. Of course, that doesn't mean they don't still crave the goodness that is hops, and thankfully these days, they have a non-alcoholic alternative. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me this week to chat about hop water, specifically the impact of using yeast in its production, is contributor Jordan Folks.
You know, I love hop water. I love sparkling water, but I also love beer. But like you just said, we can't drink beer perpetually, right? Not all day, every day, all night. And so hop water is this kind of nice, like, in between where you get the fizziness of a sparkling water, but just a little bit of scratching that itch thanks to the hops that are added.
Yeah, I'm actually going to pick up some hop water today. I haven't made my own yet, but I've had quite a few commercial versions. I'm planning on getting some Lagunitas Hoppy Refresher today because my doctor has me on this weird experiment where she wants me to cut out most beer drinking. I told her that I can't cut out all because of Brewlosophy, of course, and she kind of rolled her eyes. But she wants me to cut out beer drinking a little bit, and I haven't had coffee in 4 days, and I'm telling you it's horrible the way that I feel, especially in the mornings. But like I said, I'm regularly struck by the fact that this crisp, refreshing, hoppy beverage is as new as it is, because I feel like sparkling water, I remember Talking Rain back in the day. It used to be this big thing. How did somebody in the beer industry not realize to do this earlier than we did? I just think it's amazing to me. We're going to be going over some of the history of hop water as well as the results of an experiment you performed, Jordan, looking at the impact yeast has when making it. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Our guest for this month, June of 2025, is none other than Brewlosophy contributor and co-host of this episode, Jordan Folks. It's been quite a while since the last time you hosted one of these Q&A sessions, Jordan. So I'm sure our patrons will have some new questions for you. How are you feeling about it?
I'm excited about the new interactive format, actually getting to hang out and chat with people in real time, no longer just responding to comments in the chat. So looking forward to hanging out with everyone. Yeah,
good segue into reminding people that we now do these on Microsoft Teams, where the attendees can actually come in and talk with the guests. And so there's that. Now, Jordan, you are sort of known as our resident brewing traditionalist, at least when it comes to making lagers and sours and stuff like that. And I say that with nothing but love and appreciation. As those who have had the privilege of drinking your beer know very well that you have a gift. In my opinion, it is a gift. For anyone who's interested in learning how to brew world-class class beer, particularly IPA, lager, sour, stuff like that. This is your opportunity to learn from one of the best. Be sure to make your pledge of just $3 or more by this Saturday, June 28th, 2025, as Jordan's going to be hanging out on Sunday, the 29th. All past sessions are stored on our private Facebook and Patreon pages, so folks can go back and watch them whenever they like. Again, that's patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts that allows you to leave reviews, we really would appreciate that as well. Not only does it give us an idea of what you all think about the show, but it helps those who may not have heard of us yet to more easily find it. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having a remarkable YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell what we believe to be some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120-volt, a 5-gallon unit, or something bigger like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener Ben M. from Arnold, Maryland wrote in with some rather kind feedback saying, I recently got back into brewing after being on a rather long hiatus. I've brewed off and on since around 2003, but when COVID started, I just stopped brewing. Young kids, an overcrowded house, lack of money, lack of time, and a lack of brew buddies all just combined to put brewing way on the back burner. I'm happy to say that as of a month ago, I'm back to brewing, and I'm looking forward to doing a lot more in the coming year. I moved into a bigger place, bought an all-in-one brewing system, and life pressure has eased a bit, so I have time for brewing. I only just discovered Brewlosophy as I've been getting back into the hobby, and I just wanted to say how much I'm really enjoying all of the content you put out on all of the various platforms, and I'm super thankful for all of the great information. Hopefully before too long, I'll have something for one of the Average Brew events. Keep doing what you're doing. What great feedback, Jordan.
Brewing at its heart really is a community endeavor.
Yes.
And, whether it be your buddies or a local homebrew club, I really think that helps keep me engaged and loving the hobby. And I think that platforms such as Brewlosophy can extend that kind of community vibe to people that might be a little bit more isolated than they, maybe want to be, and help keep people in the hobby, even if they're not like going to homebrew clubs every month. There are 10 people on their block that are homebrewing. We're all in this together, and I think that the magic of the internet helps kind of extend the reach of one's immediate social brewing circle.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think that we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the internet. I mean, we've got everything that we do is digital, right? And so I just want to say thank you so much for hitting us up with that feedback, Ben. It truly is appreciated, and it's crazy for me to think that Brewlosophy has been around for nearly 12 years at this point. And in that time, we received mixed reviews, to put it nicely, from people accusing us of having some sort of covert intention of killing homebrewing, to people treating our experiment results as hard fact. We've learned how to deal with all of that stuff, but it's quite validating to occasionally just hear that what we're doing, is having a positive impact in others' lives. So again, thank you, Ben. I definitely hope you get involved in the Average Brew series so that I can maybe taste one of your beers at some point. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. When we're back from this break, our focus will be on the impact of using yeast in the production of hop water.
Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything. Brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brewlosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything. Brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. If there's one ingredient that pretty much everybody knows is in beer, it's gotta be hops. I mean, whenever non-beer nerd family or friends come over and I serve them something I made, pretty much the first thing they ask me about, whether it makes sense or not, is hops. You know, I make a strong beer and they're like, this must have a lot of hops in it. People know that hops go in beers. Now, this flavor-packed flower is just synonymous with beer, though in recent years, it's found a home in something quite different, the non-alcoholic refresher referred to as hop water. So what is hop water, Jordan?
Well, it's probably the most descriptive, item in the beer aisle. It's hops and water. And that's really about it. As we'll talk about in this episode, there's a couple different quote adjuncts you can use to kind of dial that in. But I mean, if you want to, you could literally just fill a keg with water straight from the tap if your water's good, add some hops, seal it up, put it on gas, get it cold, and start serving straight from the vessel. So it really can be that simple. But as we'll talk about this episode, there's been a lot of research that's been done to kind of dial it in to make it really fantastic. And a good hop water is so good. And there's some little levers that we can pull to really kind of like dial in the things we like and maybe shy away from the things that could make it not so good.
Yeah, and we've done another episode on hop water, and unlike beer, hop water is just hop water. So there are these different approaches to making it, but the history is very specific. So if this is a little redundant, we do apologize. But let's talk a little bit about the history of this curious drink. I mentioned earlier that I was surprised that somebody hadn't done this before now. And when you go over the history of it, again, I'm just like, man, I can't believe it took all the way until the mid 2000s for this guy, Paul Tecker, to release what he called H2 Ops. And that was released in 2014, but he was developing as a home brewer this non-alcoholic hoppy water, sometime in the mid 2000s. I was brewing at that point, and it became a thing when he commercially released this H2 Ops. Have you ever had that one, Jordan?
I think I have. But I think the first one I ever remember seeing was the Lagunitas hop water. And, they have a canned version, but I remember the bottled version sitting in like kind of craft beer bottle shops. And I was kind of surprised at the price. It was almost beer priced. And I was like, there's no way I'm spending the amount, basically the same amount as a pint of beer on a water. But when I finally tried one and bit the bullet and bought one, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like if you want one more drink before you go home or something like that, and you shouldn't have another beer, or you need to, start to hydrate, the price can be a little tough. And, there are some craft breweries that have more reasonable pricing in my opinion, but man, it is so refreshing. And it is an industrial product, right? They still have to put ingredients in it and bottle it and manufacture it. So I get it. It's not free. But the first one I ever remember seeing was the Lagunitas.
Yeah, and which I don't even know when that one came out, but it was relatively recent. It was between, probably 2014 and 2020, I'd say. So it's a new product. And what we saw, and I tend to kind of associate this focus in the population on health and on healthier options, at least, as being what really was the fire behind hop water becoming this known thing, particularly on the commercial front. But yeah, like you said, you had Hoppy Refresher from Lagunitas coming out, which I will say, I'll probably say it multiple times, that is my favorite hop water out there. And I think this episode is going to kind of prove to to our listeners why you and I think that. But then you've got Hop Splash from Sierra Nevada. Ex Brulosophy contributor Ryan Hansen is actually in the industry now making just hop water for golfers, which I think is really badass. So this hop water thing, it is a thing. It's a good, refreshing, hoppy flavored sort of, but not beer flavored, something to drink. I will say that if you aren't a fan of sparkling water, like flavored sparkling water, you're probably not going to be the biggest fan of hop water, at least to start, but it grows on you pretty quickly. But it does have a lot of the same. I mean, it's basically the same thing as a fruit flavored sparkling water. It's just flavored with hops instead of fruit. Would you say that that's pretty accurate, or?
Well, I think like everything in life, it kind of depends. I actually collaborated on an article in Zymergy. AHA subscribers can go back to the March-April issue of 2024 and read the article that I collaborated with Cody Gabbard. It's called Hop Water Capturing the Essence. And we actually did a tasting panel and tried a ton of hop waters. And then we interviewed the brewers of the hop waters to understand their brewing methods. And in that tasting panel, we observed that there's a pretty big spectrum of hop water quality, as well as some that use some kind of wackier ingredients. So, a lot of them were really fantastic. And like you said, just tasted like carbonated water with like a dry hop character. But then there were others that included like a fruit element, like a citrus juice, and then there was even one brand that was putting like non-fermented sugar in it. And so it was like a weird hop soda. And so I think that the ones that are just using basically hops and water and maybe some acid or something like that to dial it in, those are, in my opinion, the best examples. But the ones that use like a fruit juice, you really might not even taste the hops at that point because the fruit juice becomes so overpowering.
That's been my experience as well. And that's my, if you drink like hard sparkling seltzers or whatever, the ones that are made with fruit juice taste like fruit juice. They can be really good, but it's not hop water, in my opinion. You can add hops to it, but anyways, there are these options out there. Homebrewers also began to take notice. In fact, past Brulosophy contributor Jake Houlihan published a Brew It Yourself article nearly 5 years ago now of what he called his H-Brew-O, that's B-R-U, hop water, which he found to be quite satisfying. And the method that he took for that was about as simple as it gets. So there are so many ways to make this. There's a lot of things to consider. As simple as hop water is, there are things you really want to pay attention to when making it. Let's start off, obviously, with the most important, because it is 99.9% of the ingredients of hop water, and that's the water that you use.
The classic phrase, if it tastes good, you can brew with it. Maybe there is some truth to that when it comes to brewing. Like if it does actually taste good and you're just not bad at identifying off flavors, you could brew with it. But this really is going to matter in hop water. And so, here in Portland, this is an experiment I'm meaning to get to, is that our water is so pure. I do use a little simple RV filter, but I didn't used to. And who knows if it's actually making any sort of meaningful difference because our water is so pure to begin with. But just to be safe, this is when, you really want to, filter your water. And, if you have really garbage, city water, I would be getting this from the grocery store, distilled or RO, or if you're not making your own RO. But you really need a pure water source, because any sort of gross contaminants or off flavors like chlorine or chloramine are really going to be noticeable, given this is basically just carbonated water.
Yeah, exactly. And you will know, chloramines are so insanely easy to taste that you will know if you need to do something to get that out of there. You can always add a little SMB or Campton to your water to knock that stuff out before you make your hop water. I would highly recommend doing that. I have insanely low chlorine where I live, and I still do that before just making kegs of sparkling water. And it is a noticeable difference. They're both good, but why not? Why not get that stuff out of there so that you have that more pure tasting water to start with? Another little trick that some people who make hop water like to do is acidify their water, just to give it a little bit more zesty crispness, and that I've read in places that can actually make by acidifying the water, you're actually going to reduce I believe you reduce the alpha acid bitterness. Even though they're not isomerized alpha acids, you're still going to get some bitterness from those hops being, added to that warm water. And so by acidifying, you can reduce that a little bit while also improving the crispness of that flavor character. Now, one of the things that I find interesting is talk of oxidation when it comes to hop water. We are getting closer, I think, to kind of knowing a bit more about what really cold side oxidation in hoppy beers is and what causes that. It seems that the culprit is the hops themselves. And so, the idea then is if you add hops to water without all of the alcohol and the malt and all that, can it still oxidize? What are your thoughts on that, Jordan? I mean, you've made way more hop water. I've never made a batch, so.
Well, I'm very afraid of cold side oxidation when it comes to beer making. And so when making hop waters, I just kind of extended that paranoia, but wasn't really totally sure how founded it was. It's not a fermented malt-based beverage, which we know are really prone to oxidation on the cold side, even a thing like a Helles or something like that, right? So I just kind of followed my best practices, but wasn't really sure how much it mattered. But as we might see in today's experiment, maybe it does.
Yeah, maybe it does. It's to me, it's, back in the day when I started brewing, if somebody did something because they thought it was helpful, they would sell that as being necessary. We don't want to do that. What I'm going to say though is by minding cold side oxidation, it's not that hard. You're not putting much more effort into a hop water brew day by doing so. You may as well, purely for the insurance. Even if it doesn't matter, it may contribute to something positive in the long run anyways. Now, in order to reduce cold side oxidation, again, this is where Campton comes in, that sodium or potassium metabisulfite. It is just a great thing to have on hand at all times. But then you got mechanical ways of dealing with it as well. Purge your kegs with CO2 just like you would for a beer, and do your best just not to splash it around and all of that kind of stuff. Now, one of the experiments that we've done and we talked about on the show earlier was on the hop contact time when making hop water. I want to hear your thoughts on it because, again, you have the experience doing it. I know that experiment was kind of interesting. I'll let you talk about those results. But yeah, what are your thoughts on hop contact time in hop water?
Yeah, so in that article that I collaborated on, one of the best hop waters that we tried was actually locally here, Ruse Brewing. They're a really good IPA kind of focused brewery, but they do everything any style well. And their hop water was so pure. I mean, just it had that beautiful hop expression with none of the downsides that we tried in some of these other waters. No fruit juice to get in the way, etc. So when we talked to them, it was surprising, but at the same time, like no shocker. It turns out they were collaborating with Dr. Tom Shellhammer on their hop water.
Nice.
And so it's like, of course, the guru of hops is helping them dial this into just this perfect product. And so since this experiment was conducted, I've really taken a lot of the best practices I learned from Ruse. And what they're doing is a cold 24-hour dry hop. So like 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about an ounce per gallon, and a de-aerated, so lacking oxygen vessel for just like a day cold. And I think that you're getting really great hop extraction, and maybe there's a pH element there too, like at 3.5, 4.0 pH. And just that 24 hours kind of cold just is a really great extraction and expression. The fear is if you go too long, you could get grassy or vegetal notes or other things that you just don't want. And so I've never done a long dry hop, but I actually got to taste one. So our contributor, Will Lovell, did a recent experiment where he was comparing hop waters that were left in contact with hops for either 24 hours or 7 days. And I was actually visiting San Antonio when he was collecting data on those, and I got to try them. Now, he did a side-by-side, so we didn't do a triangle test, and he didn't tell me which was which, but he had me guess which one was 24 hours and which one was 7 days. And I did successfully guess accurately. And side by side, I thought the 7-day tasted just a little different, but not bad at all. And I thought both were great examples of hop water. I had a slight preference for 24 hours. But given that this returned a non-significant result and my anecdote suggested that 7 days certainly wasn't a dumper, it seems to suggest that there's a little bit more leeway in the amount of time that we spend on the hops.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by that as well, because we've tested, hop contact time in beer several times, in several experiments. I have a local friend who made a hop water that was great. He did a very simple approach again, but he left him in contact for I think 5 days, and I got no grassiness. Surprisingly, I got very little hop bitterness. It was just kind of a fruity, hop flavored. It did have some of that green myrcene hop character to it, but not that grassiness that or vegetal, that you would expect from a longer contact time. So that's an interesting thing. There are some other techniques for making hop water that maybe we should touch on. If you go and watch, More Beer put out a video back in March of 2023 where they got this information from Lagunitas on how they make their hoppy refresher hop water. And they share a lot. They do an experiment similar to the one that we're going to discuss in the next segment. But one of the things that they do is they actually perform what they refer to as a dip hop. And I'm curious if you can speak to that piece of it for making hop water. If I recall, what Vito said on that video, what Vito and Chris were talking about, is that by doing that, you're driving off that myrcene so that you don't get as much of the green, your kind of generic hop character. You get more of those terpenes that contribute that fruitiness to the hop water.
I mean, that's the theory. And so what they're doing is a dip hop and a whirlpool. So if you consider dip hop different than dry hop, they're actually not dry hopping their product. So what they're doing is they bring it to a boil, and then they'll pull off, a 10% or something like that, add that to the fermenter, throw in the dip hop charge on that, and then after the boil, like a 15-minute boil or something to de-aerate it. And also what's really important for the commercial setting is pasteurizing it effectively.
Yeah.
Because, there's no fermentation here, which is a important, aspect of making beer such a, shelf stable and safe product in terms of, contamination avoidance. So after that boil, then they do a standard whirlpool charge in the water, and then they run that off, rejoining the rest of the batch with the dip hop in the fermenter, and they, it's chilled, of course, and they pitch yeast and actually let that ferment for a couple days before racking off the dip hops and the yeast in the trube into packaging.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding with dip hopping is the idea is specifically not to boil the hops. So they'll pull that water, throw it into the keg or whatever, their fermenter, and when it gets to about 170 degrees Fahrenheit is when they're adding that dip hop charge, I believe. And again, the idea is just to kind of, that's the temperature where myrcene is going to kind of volatilize, and all that other stuff will ostensibly stay there. So very interesting technique, but perhaps the most interesting thing they do and that they talk about in that video, and I'm not sure if anybody else who's doing this, perhaps you have some info that I don't, Jordan, but they add yeast. So, you think about, there's nothing in there, at least that we're aware of, that intentionally, that's going to ferment. So why in the world are you going to add yeast to hop water? Well, there's another thing that yeast is known for doing when it's in the presence of hops, and it's that thing, biotransformation, that they're adding that yeast for. That's my understanding, at least.
Right, and so in that More Beer video, they actually did their own little experiment where they did various methods, and one of which included yeast in the process, and then they did a blind or quasi-blind tasting to kind of see whether or not the yeast actually had any sort of impact. And the More Beer guys, their opinion was that the yeast one was the best tasting one, and they were getting like the most tropical kind of notes. And in theory, some sort of biotransformation is occurring with the yeast in presence of the dip hops. Because remember, with the dip hop, you have hop matter in the fermenter with the yeast.
Yeah.
And it's creating some more novel tropical flavors that you couldn't get from just adding the dry hops or whirlpool alone into your water. But beyond that, we use yeast to create more food safe products, and also during the brewing process, it scrubs off oxygen during via the fermentation process. So I can't help but wonder if some of those things are going on here too.
Yeah, without a doubt. When you think about the secondary, I'm going to refer to them as secondary, though they're all equal. Fermentation being the primary thing we use yeast for. All of these secondary things that yeast does, it kind of starts to make sense that by adding it along with, the dip hop charge to hop water, not only are you reducing the amount of oxygen that's in there, but also potentially, at least, biotransformation is one of those weird things that I view as being quite difficult to really measure whether or not it's happening. We've done a few, hazy IPA experiments specifically focused on trying to isolate biotransformation as the variable, and it's kind of difficult because you can't really say for sure. If you're adding hops to one during high krausen and you're adding hops to the other one, either at yeast pitch or once fermentation is complete, the timing of that addition may very well be the reason for it tasting different. You can't say with 100% certainty that it's biotransformation. When making hop water, it's kind of the same thing. We know that the yeast is doing something. It's a living organism when you add it to that water. Is biotransformation the thing that it's doing that's making these hop waters, at least to more beer and Lagunitas, taste better? Who knows? But it is an interesting thing that they do. There's, like you said, there's also some speculation that adding the yeast serves as a sort of prophylactic against staling because of the eating up all of the oxygen that's in the water. So a really interesting take, in my opinion. Now, like I mentioned, I've had quite a few examples of hop water in my day, and like the guys from More Beer, I have to agree that Lagunitas Hoppy Refresher is my favorite that's out there. It's so deliciously fruity. It doesn't have that fruit juice to try to amplify the fruitiness. It's just the hops. Is this because of their use of yeast in the brewing process? That's exactly what you aim to find out in a recent experiment, Jordan. Results from that when we're back from this break.
Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything. Brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love.
Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to xchillerator.com today.
Picture this. You're halfway through a DIY car fix, tools scattered everywhere, and boom, you realize you're missing a part. It's okay because whatever it is, it's on eBay. They've got everything. Brakes, headlights, cold air intakes, whatever you need. And it's guaranteed to fit, which means no more crossing your fingers and hoping you ordered the right thing. All the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. eBay. Things people love.
As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
It's often said that brewers make wort and yeast make beer. That's because yeast is responsible for fermentation, without which beer would never exist. So the thought of using yeast in hop water does seem a little weird, at least to me, if not completely unnecessary. However, the argument from those who use yeast when making hop water has nothing to do with fermentation, but rather biotransformation, among other things. Jordan, you did an experiment to see for yourself.
Right. So this was a single 10-gallon batch of hop water. I figured that since it's a post-boil variable, let's at least keep that together and just boil it all together. In fact, I think this is actually the very first time I ever used my new claw hammer systems. So it's kind of like a pilot batch. And I thought that'd be a nice way to kind of learn the system as just boil water, basically, instead of getting into the mashing and all that stuff. So we filled, a kettle with 10 gallons, and I did filter that tap water. And one trick that I learned, again, I'm basically just reiterating or repeating the Lagunitas method here, kind of to the T. And so one of the things that they recommend is a 1-to-2 sulfate to chloride ratio. The reason being is that a hop water could be kind of harsh because of there's no malt to balance the hops. And so it seems a little counterintuitive because we're making such a crispy, zippy drink, but they recommend actually adding a little bit of chloride in there to otherwise soften it up so it's not as harsh of an experience. So I continue to do that to today. Never done an experiment testing it, but it seems to work. The other thing that's recommended to do is acidify the water. I went down to 3.3 pH, and that I know is also recommended by our former contributor Ryan to get it down there. I think that there's a food safety issue there, as well as, these are zippy, crisp drinks, and that little bit of acid really can help drive that kind of experience. Ryan actually recommends using citric acid. I've used lactic acid successfully as well. So in theory, maybe you're getting something from the citric acid that's a little different, more citrusy. Another experiment I think we could probably pursue.
Yeah, that would be really interesting just to compare acids, that you use to acidify. In that more beer video, Vito comments that, lactic acid has a flavor. I don't get the buttery thing that some people get. I think that's a batch by batch thing when it comes to lactic acid, but to compare citric to lactic or something like that would be fascinating, because if you are getting more, citrusy punch because you're using citric acid, then why not? It sounds like a good thing to me.
Mm-hmm. So the next step after adjusting to my desired water profile is I'm going to heat that water to 170 F or 77 C. And this is the first step, specifically the dip hop step. So again, we don't want to go to boiling yet because we're not trying to boil these hops. So once that bulk batch had reached that 170 F temperature, I then collected about 500 milliliters in 2 separate sanitized kegs and added 57 grams of Citra hops as the dip hop directly into the kegs with that 170 degree water, and then sealed that keg for the remainder of the quote brew day when I went back over to boil and whirlpool the rest of the batch.
Yeah, I mean, I've not made hop water myself, but this sounds like a very clean way of doing it. I love the blend of Citra hops you use Citra and what else? Motueka, right? Yeah,
so for the whirlpool, I did a Motueka charge, and the thought I was thinking was lemon lime or maybe orange lime, that Citra kind of, citrus fruit, but then Motueka with that lime on the back end.
Yeah, that blend just sounds so delectable to me. Motueka is known for that liminess that it contributes to beer, and in this case, hop water. So just a really cool, simple but neat blend specifically aimed at hop water. It sounds to me like it's going to turn out well.
Right. So with lemon lime in mind, I boiled the remaining water for 10 minutes to de-aerate and ostensibly pasteurize it before killing the heat and adding 114 grams of Motueka. So if you remember, this is a 10-gallon batch. That would be effectively 57 grams per 5-gallon batch for a 10-minute hop stand. So at that point, I put identical volumes of hoppy water. Back up. I chilled the water with my whatever chiller I was using that day, and then I transferred chilled water into the kegs, which, remember, they contain dip hops.
So are those dip hops at that point, they're losing temperature throughout the day, but they've only been in there for 15 or 20 minutes at this point, right? It's not, my head is so stuck on a regular wort boil that I'm thinking, it's been in there for an hour and a half, whatever. But in this case, those dip hops have really only been sitting in the keg for 15 or 20 minutes. So
yeah, maybe let's say 20 minutes because it's got to get to the boil as well. Maybe it's even a half hour. So I honestly wouldn't be surprised at the volumes that we're looking at here, 500 milliliters. If it's chilled down to like 190 degrees Fahrenheit, I would imagine that a professional, giant multi-barrel brewery that probably maintains its temperature a bit better. But all good because it's going to be joined with chilled water anyway to resume a more room temperature at the end of the day anyway.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, are you adding hops to the boil at all using this method?
After the boil is over, I add the Motueka whirlpool charge directly to the boil kettle, and then whirlpool at whatever the temperature remains after cutting the boil. I've found, at least in beers, that on my system, I'm getting about 185 degrees Fahrenheit is the reading for the bulk of a 10-minute whirlpool circulation.
Yeah, so a pretty classic hop stand basically is all you're doing.
Exactly. So there are no true dry hops added to this Lagunitas style approach, just the dip hop, but that does not only, exist with the bulk of the batch during the resting phase, but there's also yeast present, or at least in one of the two batches, and that's where the variable comes in. So at this time, it was time to add the variable, which was yeast. So I have 2 batches of hop water that are chilled, sitting in fermentation kegs with a charge of dip hops in there. And in one of the 2 kegs, I added 100 milliliters of Imperial Yeast A07 Flagship, which is their Chico strain. And then the other one received nothing. And so now I want to say that before I filled these with the dip hops, I did do the closed transfer sanitizer flush. So the keg was filled to the brim with a non-foaming sanitizer, pushed with CO2 to the next one, and then pushed out of the second one into a receiving keg for later use. So these things were totally purged before I filled them with water. But nonetheless, you have to open the top of the keg lid and get all the water in there and all that stuff. So just to try to get any extra O2 out from the filling process, I then purged those with CO2 and then left them to sit or, quote, ferment at 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 C for 5 days before I pressure transferred those to clean and sanitized serving kegs. I will note that I'm using a floating dip tube with a filter, so I don't need to bag the dip hop. I'm able to successfully separate the liquid from the hop matter using this floating dip tube with a filter method.
Did you do any sort of a cold crash to drop those hops out, or just kind of presume that they were sitting at the bottom of the keg anyways?
Forgive me, I'm not looking at the notes, but knowing me, I probably did cold crash them, because I've found, and this is an interesting experiment as well, that I do not tend to get any sort of clogs with a cold crash on a dry hopped beer, or for this matter, a hop water. Whereas when I first started fermenting in kegs, I would sometimes get clogged transfers via the dry hop, and I'm just having better luck, or maybe the cold crash does actually drop those hops to the bottom, so I get really easy closed transfers with this method.
Yeah, I would absolutely cold crash. I plan on making hop water once I get my everything set back up again, just because it sounds so good to have on tap all the time. But I would do the cold crash one because, again, it adds one more night, whatever. Why did you go with 5 days for the fermentation? Is that something that we learned from Lagunitas, or did you just kind of fit your schedule, or?
I think it was a little bit of both. Wanted to make sure that they both had. Or the yeast one had plenty of time to, quote, biotransform.
Right.
And I had never done this before. So, 5 days, whatever.
Might as well. Yeah, I'd be curious to see that, if we're going to say that yeast is a crucial component to making a really fruity tasting hop water, it'd be curious to see like a 24-hour versus 5-day or something. But that's again for another time.
Mm-hmm. So again, these were transferred to sanitized serving kegs, which were once again doing that full to the brim non-foaming sanitizer pushed out with CO2 purging method. So this way it's going into a serving vessel that's ostensibly virtually totally clear of any sort of oxygen. So those filled kegs were then burst carbonated at 40 PSI for 3 days. Then I removed that gas or reduced it to serving pressure, and the waters were left to condition for a few more days before I started collecting data.
Let's go. So, and before we get into the data, this is something we could have hit on in the last segment, but we didn't. The carbonation level. Do you have a preference? This is just kind of an aside. The hop waters that I've loved the most have been super sparkling. The ones that I find less enjoyable don't have that really crispy soda-like carbonation. What do you aim for? How do you get there?
Yeah, I'm going really high, and so maybe put it at, like I said, 40 PSI for 3 days. That's going to be a really high level of carbonation. But I will say what's interesting is when we interviewed those brewers for the Hop Water article for Zymergy magazine, one thing we heard was that true soda levels of carbonation, what's soda at? Do you know?
I believe the hovers around 3.0 to 3.2 volumes of CO2.
Okay. Well, as they described as soda levels, they said that could actually be harsh because of the carbonic bite clashing with the hop bitterness.
Oh, yeah.
And so apparently there is too much of a good thing, but I would say definitely err on the high side of carbonation, because if it's like middling carbonation, it's kind of gross.
Yeah, so maybe like Saison carbonation at about 2.8, 2.9 as opposed to soda carbonation around that 3.2, 3.3 type of level. So
right, and if you go too high, which I've done on accident, it's actually kind of hard to fill a glass because it'll just like create so much breakout. You would need super long lines. So air high, but if it's so carbonated you can't pour it, you're not doing yourself any favors.
Yeah, and if you one of the problems with super high carbonation is that it'll express itself readily in the glass to where the drink no longer has the carbonation you wanted because it was so carbonated it all expressed itself. So, okay, perhaps the most interesting part of this experiment is the first thing we're going to talk about in terms of the objective observations. Anybody who goes and reads this article, which the link is down in the description of this episode, will, and you scroll down to the final photo that we take for all of our experiments, which is a comparison of the two beers, or in this case, hop waters, sitting next to each other. There is a very drastic difference in the way these things look that confused the hell out of me, Jordan.
It was bizarre. I mean, I think this is one of the weirdest, craziest things I've ever experienced in brewing overall, let alone for Brewlosophy. The hop water made with yeast, was pale in color, right? Looked like hop water. The one made without yeast looked like dirty brown dishwater. It was disgusting.
It looks like a pale ale. Like you look at them together and it's like you got a sparkling water next to a Sierra Nevada pale ale is how I see it. It is crazy, the difference. And all we can do is speculate as to what's going on there or what caused that. You tasted, I'm sure there were some people who were like, he accidentally pulled a pale ale, off of it. No, you were tasting these. You knew they were hop waters. One of them just got darker. And the only thing that my mind goes to when I see a color change like that is oxidation. The weird thing is we've done other hop water stuff on for Brewlosophy. I've had other hop waters made different ways, and I've never seen anything like that. Every hop water that we've made besides this experiment has used a completely different method. There was no dip hop. Usually the hops were added, towards the tail end of the boil or just as a dry hop. So there were differences, and I can't help but wonder if this approach that Lagunitas has, if you just take out the yeast, apparently, if it contributes to this weird, seemingly oxidative darkening.
Yeah, I think I've done a lot of hop water since then and learned a lot, and especially in collaboration on that article. And I have some very strong theories as to what's going on here. So let's save those for the implications discussion and see how I did on the personal impressions.
Okay, how did you do?
So I did 5 personal triangle tests. So semi-blind, I know what the variable is, but I don't know which sample is in which cup. And I'm telling you, this was the most obvious difference of any experiment I've ever done myself or had the pleasure of tasting from like Will or Kate or someone. I got 5 out of 5 correct. And I mean, it was like you could tell which one was which from the other room. The aroma was crazy, where the, yeasted one had that, beautiful, lemon lime kind of aroma, whereas the non-yeasted one smelled like death.
That is so weird, man. And I mean, just to be clear, you did everything exactly the same to both of these beers, except for the yeast. They got the same, hops from the same bag. The water was for the same everything was identical except for the yeast. So we can say with some degree of certainty, the yeast had some sort of a positive benefit when using this Lagunitas method, at least in your personal experience. Of course, that's not what we hang our hat on. You served these hop waters to 20 participants, out of whom 11 would have had to identify the unique sample in order for us to say with even more confidence that yes, there really is a difference here that does seem to be tied to this yeast addition. How many in the end? You needed 11. How many actually got the triangle test correct?
Out of 20, somehow only 18 got it right. It's like
that just substantiates this thing that we have, that you could serve somebody a Bud Light next to a Guinness and somebody's going to not be able to distinguish them. So that's fair. 18 out of 20, that's 60%. That's crazy.
No, that's not 60%. That's like 90%. So people were clearly able to reliably tell these apart. And it was so funny when people would do it. They'd look at me, they're like, what the hell did you just serve me in this one cup? Like, you trying to poison me? I mean, the not only was the aroma just miserable, but the non-yeasted sample, it had this like sharp, stale, just oxidized IPA bleh in it. And so, no surprise, 17 of 18 preferred the yeasted batch. And one said no difference, or I'm sorry, no preference. But
they probably just didn't like either of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did a hop water experiment with my homebrew club recently, and one of the homebrewers in the club, she's like, "Nah, I don't like hop water. I'm not participating." She wouldn't even taste it.
Yeah. And I have to imagine that one person who's like, I don't even have a preference. Screw these things. Thank you for doing the experiment. You clearly got it right, but it's okay. You're not going to like everything. That is just fascinating to me. And I'm so curious if we would be able to, consistently replicate the gross batch, like by doing the exact process. You would think so, right? That if you did everything that you did and didn't add the yeast, you're probably going to end up with a hop water that is markedly more horrible than if you had just done a less, slightly less convoluted hop water approach. Yet you add that yeast and now you've got, would you say that that's the best hop water you've ever made, or?
I don't know. And it was a while at this point, and I've made a lot since then, but I have some theories as to what's going on here. And so in that article that I did for Zymergy, I think it's about half of the brewers we interviewed added their hops on the cold side, and about half added theirs on the hot side. And so I will say, for sake of ease, just adding them on the cold side as a quote dry hop. It's way easier. I recently did an experiment testing the importance of de-aerating the water, and in fact, it was significant, and that's interesting. We can talk about that in another podcast episode. But both were still good, and neither one of them was like miserably oxidized. Notably, I didn't add any yeast in those, and so I'm thinking what's going on here is that preventing oxidation is really important once you get the cooking of the hops via the dip hop in the whirlpool. I think that that is a very important interactive variable as it relates to it darkening and color. I think that although you could still oxidize a cold side dry hopped hop water, my guess is that if you're going to use this hot side method, that the yeast actually is important for the prophylactic effect.
God, yeah.
Again, that's a hypothesis. Additionally, I'll say this is, since then, I've taken my cold side oxidation mitigation practices to the extreme on hop water. And now what I'll do is I'll actually put my hop waters under pressure during the dry hopping phase so that no oxygen can creep in whatsoever. When I transferred these two hop waters from this experiment into the serving kegs, the one that had a yeast addition gave a little hiss when I pulled on the PRV valve. So some sort of carbonation or whatever had built up via the yeast activity perhaps. Whereas the non-yeasted batch, remember, I had purged them and stuff, but 5 days later, when I went to pull the PRV, no hiss whatsoever. And so I think that it's really important to be using purged vessels, which I did. But if you're going to cook your hops, it seems like perhaps you need to make sure that you have top pressure during the fermentation, or I guess in this case, non-fermentation, like dip hopping phase, because if any sort of oxygen is going to creep in, there seems to be a really dramatic reaction with those cooked hops in the water, which can actually expedite staling and discoloration. Whereas if you can just keep some head pressure on there, you can really mitigate that. Yeah. And so that's something I didn't do on this, and it was a very important lesson learned. And it seems that if you don't, for example, have CO2 in your brew house, you can use yeast to prevent any sort of oxidation. But since I've only experienced this when using a hot side addition, it's unclear to me if that is still going to happen with cold side additions. And further, I don't know if you actually need yeast if you're not cooking the hops.
Man, this is I'm having all of these weird thoughts right now. To me, I feel like we can learn a lot about hopping approaches. So let's just take dip hop, for example, in beer, but by experimenting with it in hop water, because, effectively, if you're dip hopping hop water, you're doing basically the same thing you would be doing for beer. Mm-hmm. It's just that you've got all that wort and other flavorful stuff in the way. To me, it just makes sense to test some of these things out using hop water now to really get an idea of the impact these methods might actually have. And then you can implement them in beer and see for yourself there. But this is just absolutely fascinating to me. The fact that you made water oxidize ostensibly is just mind-blowingly interesting. And as for me, when I make my hop water, I'm going the Lagunitas. I'm doing the full thing that you did in the batch that was good in this experiment, because I really want to be able to see that, experience that for myself, the impact that the dip hopping and the yeast have. But man, just fascinating finding here. We got some interesting reader feedback. One that I think attempts to kind of explain a little bit what happened here. Jordan Thompson says dried yeast extract is used in wine to prevent oxidation, as it has thiol compounds like glutathione. This is probably what's happening here. What do you think about that, Jordan?
We didn't really talk too much about biotransformation. We were so focused on oxidation. And so I don't know if any sort of biotransformation actually occurred. But we do have pretty strong evidence that oxidation did occur in the non-yeasty batch. So what the chemical pathway or, biological pathway in which that happens, I don't know. This seems like a reasonable hunch, but clearly something is going on with oxidation mitigation.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. AJ says, this is cool. It seems like the yeast is acting as a natural preservative. Was the yeast active? Is this kind of like top cropping the hop water? I wonder how this method would compare to sodium metabisulfite. It's definitely not top cropping. That would require active fermentation for you to take the yeast off. But the yeast was... I don't know if you would refer to the yeast that you use as active or not, Jordan.
I didn't top crop put spoon krausen off of an active fermentation, nor did I do a yeast starter with DME. So it was just kind of pure yeast, but it wasn't 4-year-old liquid yeast from my backyard. So it was ostensibly alive, but I think the SMB comment is interesting. I don't know much about that stuff, but I would assume that the interactions that are happening on that help prevent staling is something like some sort of interaction with the malt. So do you think that, or at the very least the hops, so if you were to add SMB to water, before you've added any sort of hops, would it actually do what it's intended to do in terms of staling prevention, or does that chemical pathway not happen if there's not malt present?
I don't know if it matters if malt or hops are present, but the way I'm by no means a chemist, so I don't have the greatest explanation for this, but the way it was explained to me how Campton or SMB works is if you add it to water, the first thing it's going to do, if there's nothing else there, is it's going to take the chlorine and the chloramines out. Mm-hmm. However it does that, right? And you don't need much for that at all. We're talking 0.3 to 0.5 grams. It's not much at all. But then anything left over, it's going to create this redox reaction, right? Where it reduces the oxygen that is in that water. And it does it very quickly. So I would imagine if you added a little bit, say in the beginning for chloramines, and then you added same amount, this tiny little amount to your keg when you're racking it over, that it would probably have a similar prophylactic impact to oxidation as it does with beer. I don't know why it wouldn't if the chlorine and chloramines are already out of the water,
Yeah, I don't know. So yet another experiment for us to look at.
Exactly. All right. Final comment comes from Kevin Branchard, who says, to me, it looks like the yeast might be helping clarify the hop water when it flocculates. That's a really interesting idea, actually. He says, I'd be surprised that it's scavenging oxygen without any sugar in there. Although I suppose if the slurry is active at pitching, this may happen to some degree. But the flocculation bit, that is, I don't know why hop water wouldn't clear up mostly anyways, but maybe that flocculation did help a little bit, or the yeast did help with that.
Gosh, yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't know. And, you know, I've played around with like gelatin fining and stuff like that on hop waters. And I think that there's, at the homebrew level, where we're not using filters, there's definitely more exploration into finding out how to make these things as clear as possible, should that be a goal for the hop water maker.
Yeah, interesting stuff. But that does bring us to the end of this episode. Do you have any final thoughts on using yeast when making hop water, Jordan?
If you're going to use a hot side hop, I'd strongly recommend it. I don't know that it's necessary if you're only using a cold side dry hop, but no matter your method, I would strongly encourage you to do everything you can to mitigate cold side oxidation, including keeping some CO2 pressure on your storage vessel during the either dip hopping or dry hopping phase, because as we've learned, you do not want oxygen in your hop water.
It's just so weird to me that we're talking about sparkling water with hops in it and oxidation is coming up. But please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Brulosophy Show, at youtube.com/@TheBrulosophy Show. That's the @ symbol followed by The Brulosophy Show. No umlaut needed. If you're listening to this podcast, we're confident you're going to love the videos Martin's creating over at YouTube as well. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brulosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brulosophy Podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman.